Welcome to the December 2nd Richfield Transportation Commission meeting. It is 7 p.m. I call this meeting to order. The first item on our agenda tonight is to review and approve the agenda. And either now or after that is done, I will also take roll call. Joe, are you with us?
Hi, Wes, I am.
Do you want to do roll call?
Sure. Ivy is going to do a roll tonight. She has the roll with her. So I'll let her...
Okay. Perfect. Hi, Olivia. Are you on?
Hi.
Great. Why don't we do roll call first, and then we'll move on to the rest of the items on the agenda.
Okay, sure. Let me Wes Dunser.
Here.
Ken Severson. Commissioner Paul Tillman.
Ken is here. I had on mute.
And Commissioner Paul Tillman. Bradley. Commissioner
Here, hello.
Commissioner Molly O'Howard. Commissioner Dan Edgerton.
Present.
Commissioner Jeffrey Waltz.
Here.
Commissioner, and you'll have to excuse me, I might mess up your last name, Louis Zerzak. And then liaisons, Liaison O'Leary.
Here.
Councilmember Troutman. Liaison Wendt.
Present.
Okay, great. Then,
And Olivia, would you mind calling Molly O'Howard one more time?
sure. Is Molly O'Howard present?
Present. Thank you.
She's
Sorry,
here.
I'm late.
All right.
All right. Thank you. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to review and approve the agenda. If everyone's had a chance to review the agenda, if there's any questions or any changes, that would be the time to make them. Otherwise, if not, we'll need a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
So, all right. Moved by Walt, seconded by Severson. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. All right. Motion is approved. Okay. The next item on our agenda is to review and approve the minutes from our last meeting, which was on October 7th, 2020. Has everyone received a copy of the minutes? And is there any questions about the minutes or any changes that need to be made? And if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
All right. It's been so moved by Lou. And any seconds?
Second.
By Jeff. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, hearing none, the minutes from the October 7th meeting have been approved. And now I'll hand it over to Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's my video. Everything decided to hiccup on me there for just a second. Moving on to the fourth item on the agenda, the thank you to commissioners. To clarify for the commission, there was some confusion with our public works staff and communication with our city hall staff. until just a few hours ago, our staff in Public Works was under the impression that this meeting in December would be the last meeting for any departing commission members. That is not the case. So commission terms will be ending after the meeting next month on January 6th. So for those of you that have terms that are expiring in January, you will be contacted by staff at City Hall to discuss applying for and renewing for a subsequent term. And then at that point, any seats that are vacant by commissioners leaving the commission will be filled by City Council. And we'd welcome any new commissioners at the meeting in February. So of course, nonetheless, we thank all of you for your service to the city on the commission over the past year and look forward to working with many or all of you moving forward.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Moving on then to item 5 on our agenda, the I-494 airport to highway. And for this, I'll hand it back over to Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to bring up a presentation to share with you tonight and give you a little background, and then we'll walk through the presentation together, and I'll entertain any questions or discussions along the way. Feel free to interrupt, ask me to clarify any points, expand on anything. This is really intended to be a chance for the Transportation Commission to review some material that you haven't seen for, I think, nearly a year at this point. I believe the last time the commission discussed the 494 vision was perhaps the January or February meeting, which may have been the last meeting or second to last meeting held in person at City Hall. So just a little bit of background regarding the vision, some context for what you'll see tonight and how it relates to this entire process for MnDOT. The 494 vision is an initiative, obviously being led by MnDOT as the lead agency, to develop a vision for the 494 corridor between Highway 169 and the airport. I think hopefully most of you are somewhat aware of the history of this. It's many decades in the making, and involves many elements around, along, and outside of the 494 corridor, with all of the cities that border the corridor in this area. So what I'm going to show you tonight is a presentation that the MnDOT team on the 494 vision will be sharing with the Policy Advisory Committee a week from today. The Policy Advisory Committee, if you don't know, is made up of representatives of local and regional agencies, and it advises the MnDOT team on the direction that they would like to see this vision take. The city's representatives for the Policy Advisory Committee are Councilmember Troutman, who's with us tonight, and Mayor Regan Gonzalez. So a little bit of background of this info is really summarizing the process over the last 6 months or so that the MnDOT team has been working through with both the Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC, and also individually with local agency staff. So the City of Richfield, the City of Bloomington, Hennepin County specifically. And the opportunity here tonight is for you as our Transportation Commission for the City of Richfield to view some of this information, understand where MnDOT is at in their process, what they're bringing to the PAC next week, and give you the opportunity to have some discussion, provide any input on the current status of the vision that you'd like to share, and that perhaps our liaison, Councilmember Troutman, can use and bring to the PAC next week when he attends that meeting. So, and I'll also just mention that, well, this isn't an official action by the commission on this. Any action by the commission would be taken in the future when certain elements of the 494 vision are turned into actual projects, and there would at that point be a public involvement process. The commission would review those projects in detail and offer recommendations to council on whether to support or not support those individual projects. So just some context to think about as you're viewing this information tonight. So I'm going to try to give you what we believe will be MnDOT's presentation to the PAC. This was basically given to our staff just this morning. So fairly fresh info. I've changed a couple things around from what MnDOT is presenting, and I'll note those as we go along, just to provide what I think is a little better clarification for the commission, and ordered things in a way that I hope helps this presentation to flow just a little bit more and keeps it connected. This first slide here is just the agenda for the PAC meeting. Really not consequential, I think, for our discussion tonight, except that it summarizes a few of the issues that that MnDOT team will be talking through at the PAC meeting. The first item they have on their presentation is a quick recap. The last time the Policy Advisory Committee met was in June of 2020. At that point, the MnDOT team brought to them what they were calling Project A, which was intended to be the first project of the 494 complete vision. Project A, as you can see here in the bottom slide, was the reconstruction of the 35W interchange and construction of MnPass in both directions from Highway 35 to Highway 100. They then expanded that with a implementation plan that's shown here, essentially stating that this was the order in which they envisioned the entire corridor vision to be constructed in projects A, B, C, D, and E. The result is, some of you may be aware or not, is that the PAC was not particularly pleased with seeing Project A. There were a number of concerns raised to the MnDOT team, and in not mincing my words, I guess, they were sent back to the drawing board on some of these elements. There were many more issues, I think, and concerns that are what are listed here on this slide, but these are some of the larger ones. The big ones that we'll touch on tonight here are the equity impacts that the Policy Advisory Committee did not feel the MnDOT team was adequately considering in the vision. And specifically operational concerns with eastbound traffic east of 35W, which was, I think, widely viewed as probably one of the largest congested corridors on this network, and really was not being addressed with the first project as Project A was presented by the MnDOT team. So some of the direction that the PAC gave to the MnDOT team was discuss how to define equity across the corridor vision, consider a proposal that includes parts of Project A and Project B. Just for reference, if we back up a couple slides, proposed Project B was reconstruction of the bridges crossing 494 between 35W and 77, and we'll get into that a little bit more here. And then tying into the equity, they asked the project team to make sure that whatever the first project is on this vision, that it really is considering and serving all of the users for the region and for the corridor. So to move forward, the MnDOT team will be presenting what has been happening since that June PAC meeting. And the answer is that every other week since August, there have been technical advisory committee meetings. Those involve staff from many local agencies and the MnDOT team. So at any given TAP meeting, for example, for Richfield, you will see typically transportation engineer Jack Bros, myself, or Public Works Director Asher, or any combination of the three of us attending all of those meetings. The same equivalent staff typically will be attending from Bloomington and from Hennepin County, occasionally from Medina or Eden Prairie. In addition to that, we have also been having meetings on the off weeks from the TAC meetings, which is just between the city staffs of Richfield, Bloomington, and Hennepin County, and delving into some more detailed issues of how the vision is impacting or benefiting our respective communities. There has been no public engagement by MnDOT since May, when they had a business listening session for some local businesses, but that process will be restarted at some point, hopefully in the near future, when the revised first project is presented to the PAC and approved to move forward. And then lastly, MnDOT has stopped referencing or referring to what was previously known as Project A. So some of the main points here that have been considered, and we'll go through all of these tonight except for the min-pass limits. I removed that from the presentation here, and it's actually not going to be presented to the PAC either. The reasoning being, it's really just an operational decision that will be made as part of that respective project for the min-pass lanes. And theoretically, it has little impact on Richfield as a community or our specific community impact. So it's not discussed here, and I think it's generally viewed as not as important as some of these other items, and there hasn't been as much time spent on that as there has these other items with the TAC meetings.
Joe, real quick, what are the min-pass limits?
So the big discussion, and I guess the quick answer is that they're yet to be determined what those final limits would be. Discussion we have had is really focused around where do the min-pass lanes begin at the east and west termini of the project. So for example, if you're looking at the east termini of the corridor, do the min-pass lanes begin to the east or the west of Highway 77, or the east or the west of the 24th Avenue interchange? And really that ultimate decision will come down to comparing cost benefit analysis and operational gains or losses depending on where those lanes are started. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I think that's important, because I assumed that it wasn't about that. I thought it was about the limits for like who gets to access it or when.
No, it's
okay.
The discussion's purely on the physical ending and starting point termination of those lanes.
Just a quick clarification to follow up on that. So the area outside the min-pass lane will continue to be 3 general purpose lanes. There won't be like an extra 4th lane added when the min-pass ends.
I believe that's correct. I don't want to give you that answer without sitting here and looking at it, just because it's not something that we've discussed particularly recently.
Okay, I would just say I think that adding a 4th general purpose lane versus adding a min-pass lane is of concern to Richfield, because it would increase the traffic and affect us. But I hope that's not an issue, and it says you're guessing it is. So yeah,
and again, I guess to respond to that, this is the opportunity to bring up concerns like that so they can be raised at the PAC level. And again, when these projects actually move forward as projects and not just as a vision for the corridor, then obviously the Transportation Commission and the City Council would have opportunities to weigh in on those concerns. Ultimately, any project along the corridor is going to require municipal consent from the City Council to move forward. So, Moving into the equality versus equity discussion here a little bit. You may recognize this slide from Gloria Jean's presentation to the commission in July of this year. This is something I think MnDOT actually pulled directly from that presentation because they may have had a representative there, I believe. So there was a fair amount of discussion at our TAC meetings of what is equality, what is equity, and how can we implement that in transportation planning. And so the definition that MnDOT has presented here is that transportation equity ensures fair distribution of mobility options and transportation investments that connect people with opportunities and resources necessary to support their well-being. So what this kind of has resulted in is the discussions with the PAC and with the MnDOT team trying to look at all of the users, and especially those users of lower income or minority populations along the corridor or adjacent to the corridor, and determining how each of the elements of the vision, or theoretically each of the future projects, would either benefit or impact those communities. The way the MnDOT team has approached this and tried to, I guess, perform this analysis is that they have looked at each of the elements in the vision, and they have compared how the users of 3 different groups, but really 4 different groups, and I'll explain that in a second, are impacted or benefited by each of these elements along the corridor. So the groups that they developed were commuters, statewide users, local users, and then really the 4th group is that first point there in red, which is the minority and low income populations. So you see here, this is not an all-inclusive list by any means. The colors don't necessarily mean anything on this slide. But this is just illustrating a number of the areas and the assessments that the MnDOT team considered in this discussion. So a couple of slides just illustrating how they worked through this process. This is census tract data with what this is illustrating is the shaded tracks are family poverty levels above the Hennepin County average of 7.1%. And then you see the number of different symbols here indicating grocery stores, markets, public spaces, community events, other businesses, serving both the general populations, and the little yellow boxes are what they call the EJ populations, which is environmental justice. I believe that's a term that's mainly used in the kind of federal Department of Transportation sphere, but it generally encompasses low income and minority populations. So what you'll see here is that their investigation of these tracks along the 494 corridor really illustrated that many of these public destinations and these businesses and amenities that are used and needed by the low income and minority populations are very much centered around the 494 corridor on both sides of the highway. So both in Bloomington and Richfield, and it led to this this discussion of there needing to really be connectivity across the 494 corridor for these populations. And so there are a few points I'll touch on later in the presentation here where that played into some additional analyses that weren't being done originally and now are going to factor into the corridor vision. Second map here is similar, but instead of a income analysis, it's a minorities population of minorities above the Hennepin County average of 25.6% is what you see in the shaded tracks. So again, you'll see that these populations really are focused along the corridor, And so equity for these populations has to be, it has to be considered, and a very strong consideration in this vision process. This slide's generally just a kind of a summary of what the MnDOT project team then is going through and what they're considering for equity. So they determined that's part of the decision for the vision is to determine who will benefit and who will bear the brunt of impacts of the different sections of the vision, different elements. Determine who we, being the people and the municipalities, MnDOT, the TAC, the PAC, the people who are bringing this vision to life, who are we really serving with the corridor? And again, looking at their original Project A and saying who was really being served by Project A. Looking at how and when a certain entity or a certain group bears a burden. Is it before, during, or after the work on 494? So looking not only at what happens during construction, but what does the final product of this vision provide or take away from certain populations? And then the determination that the ultimate vision solution, so the overall vision for the corridor, needs to be equitable, but also the way in which that vision is implemented. So the implementation plan, which will guide how projects are scheduled and constructed, that needs to be equitable as well. So the next step in making some of those determinations was developing this map of what the team is calling corridor elements. You'll notice this looks really similar to that smaller slide that was on the second or third page, which showed MnDOT's projects A, B, C through D, E, I think. This is basically taking those projects, but now they have just numbered them. It's in no particular order except for being west to east. And the intent here is that this is a reasonable way to split the different elements of the corridor and assess them against a number of criteria to determine not only is it equitable, but cost effectiveness, safety analyses. And there's a number of criteria here that they'll show you in a few minutes. But the important point here, I think, is that the MnDOT team is no longer saying these are going to be individual standalone projects. These are just elements that we're going to assess. And an individual project in the long term for the vision could take bits and pieces or parts of any of these elements, or do multiple elements at once to form a project as the vision moves forward. This is basically just a little bit more explanation there of that map. Again, I talked about the 4 user groups that MnDOT is assessing for each of these elements. So here they actually do show that 4th group is the local minority or low income group. And then they've taken each of these elements and they've developed a map. So it's a visual representation of the impacts and the benefits that will be seen through construction of each of these project elements. And I'll walk through these a little bit with you. There's a lot of information over the next 7 or 8 slides here, 9 slides. I want to note that this is not being included in the presentation to the PAC, but MnDOT is including this as a separate standalone handout. So my understanding is they don't intend to get into a deep and detailed discussion with the PAC at this time, but I felt it was important to show to the commission to take a look at this tool that the team is using to assess each of the elements and try to understand how each of these elements will affect the different user groups. So just to kind of go over the basics here, as you'll see, this isn't really relevant to Richfield. This is on the west end of the project, this first slide. We'll work over to the Richfield stuff here in just a minute. But you can see the different symbols symbolize the different user groups that they've assessed. So statewide, commuters, local, and local minority or low income is the yellow colored houses here. So for each of these elements where they're either changing, they might be changing a ramp configuration or adding the min-pass lane, noise impacts. They've tried to assess whether this is a benefit shown in blue, so something that they would consider positive, or an impact shown in red, something they consider negative. And they associate one of the 4 symbols for the user groups to show which, if any of the user groups are being impacted or benefited by each of these scenarios. So I'm going to kind of just browse through this fairly quickly. This is something that can be provided if you'd like to look at it further in the future. Happy to talk about it a little bit now. I think the important thing to note here is that this is still a work in progress. There was discussion even this morning that there's certain benefits and impacts here that need to be refined further. There's certain benefits and impacts that may be a benefit for one group and an impact for another. And so this is a work in progress. I think it's going to be refined more. And ultimately, it's a tool that the team and the TAC will use to develop recommendations on how the vision is implemented, and we'll take those recommendations to the PAC within, I believe, the next probably 3 to 4 months. One other thing to note is a couple of the bubbles you'll see here have a little asterisks. This indicates a benefit or impact that may only be realized with full vision implementation. So for instance, this is referring to the benefit of min-pass for improving the operations on the main line. And you'll see this map in particular is talking about the 35W interchange and min-pass in westbound on the west side of the project. So this asterisk is saying that even if they were to construct this min-pass lane as part of this phase of the vision, there are probably other sections or other phases of the vision that would need to be impacted to realize the full benefit provided by those min-pass lanes. So as basically this moves west to east, this is looking at eastbound min-pass lanes on the west side of the project. This slide is specifically looking at the 82nd Street interchange in Bloomington, so relatively little impact for Richfield. And then this slide is really probably the most relevant to Richfield. This is discussing the interchange and access reconfiguration of the Nicollet, Portland, and 12th Avenue bridges. So there's a lot of info here. I'll give you a couple minutes to digest if you'd like to, and if you have any comments or questions on that, happy to talk about it. I will say the next thing we're going to move into is a little more discussion on the Portland Avenue interchange specifically, and we'll probably address some of the questions or points you have here, but I'll let you know if that's the case.
Joe, can you go back one slide, please?
Sure.
So just looking at this here, am I right in understanding that reconnecting Penn Avenue to the existing infrastructure that exists so you can get on and off from 494 if you're traveling from 35, that hasn't been added back in? Are you familiar with that conversation that we've been having? And
I am, yes. Though I haven't been, I think, specifically involved much in that, and it hasn't been a conversation that we've had with the TAC in, say, the last 3 to 4 months. I'm aware that there was a couple months ago, I believe, with the Chamber of Commerce. I think some discussion there, and to be honest, I don't know that that's been resolved with MnDOT or not.
I guess I'm a little confused that it wouldn't be on here as at least an impact, if they weren't going to add it back in. Because that would be a huge amount of traffic having to go to all of these side roads. And and I think from a public perception standpoint, very frustrating that something that it seems like, feasibility, capability was taken away from the system. Now from Penn Avenue, you can't get onto 35W. You have to travel through all these side roads with everyone else.
I think that is partially addressed by maybe this box up in the right hand corner here, but maybe not as fully as it should be. So that's certainly, I think, good feedback and something that can be taken back to the team. Okay, if I move back into the next slide, if you'd like to look at that a little bit more.
Yeah, please go for it.
I had a question. You said that we're going to discuss this a bit more down the road. The impacts of Portland Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just want to comment. I do think, it's good that they are looking at the impacts in this type of way. It is a little concerning that it's occurring, so late in the planning process. And I know it's kind of something that needs to be addressed maybe throughout the whole state, is that not a lot of groups or not a lot of elected officials, not a lot of planning committees are thinking about equity. And even when we were discussing some of these issues in the planning around 494, it seems like it's hard for a lot of people to wrap their minds around what that means and the impact that it has on the actual community members.
Yeah, that's really great input and great feedback. And I guess my response would just be that I would say Richfield's staff is certainly 100% in agreement with that, and that's something we have been pushing for and continue to push for in this process. So but it can always be improved, and so I appreciate the feedback, and I will leave it up to, of course, Councilmember Troutman going to the PAC to pass that along if he feels so inclined.
If I could just say one thing about this slide, and I hope Councilmember Troutman might pass this on. I really object to listing it as a benefit for local minority and low-income residences to improve air quality. That would only be true if traffic does not increase, which is very rarely the case. We know that when we add a new lane, about 95% of that capacity gets filled up relatively quickly. So although cars may move faster temporarily, we're adding more cars to the road. We are not improving air quality, and I think it's a little bit offensive to say that as a benefit to people who live right next to the highway to add more lanes to them. It may be the right choice on balance, but I think it's objectionable to put that as a benefit to those users or those residents.
Commissioner Dunzer, could I jump in? Or
I'm not sure if he heard you, Councilmember.
oh,
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Troutman was asking if he could add something.
Absolutely, please do.
I just wanted to just a couple of things. One, I want to thank staff and you, Mr. Powers, and Jack Bros, who's not here, and Director Asher, who not just when we say that we sent the MnDOT back to the planning board, it was in no small part because I think one of the comments that they made that they admitted something to the effect of equity was an afterthought. I don't know if they used quite those words, but they used almost those words in the last PAC meeting. And so I want to thank everybody for contributing to this. And this is the beginnings of that conversation. But I just want to thank our staff and our mayor and a lot of our surrounding community members, folks on the Bloomington and Edina City Council, and our commissioner Debbie Gotel, all really spoke very clearly with one voice, saying that we would not consider any proposal that didn't go back and bring an equity lens to the whole project and the whole vision. And so even as I think I don't want to stifle any of this conversation away. I hope we have more. I'm not wanting to make a final comment. I hope we can continue to make observations about this, but I just want to say that this is a rough draft that's not perfect, or maybe they think this is a perfect draft, but this is a fruit of a lot of stakeholders coming together and saying we won't move forward unless we have these conversations. And I think Richfield is the benefit of being able to push that pause. But a special thanks to Director Asher for helping us think through and articulate a lot of those concerns.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to repeat what Councilmember Troutman said, if anyone has any other comments, this is that rough draft, but now's a good time to throw out those ideas and maintain our passion and involvement and make sure that the equity is reviewed from every angle. So if you have an idea and you're not sure if it's been mentioned or not, please go ahead and mention it, because there's a good chance it hasn't.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just one comment that's swirling around in my head, Commissioner Edgerton, from the beginning of this project, has to do with the Portland Avenue Bridge and the connection specifically there as it relates to pedestrians. My comment, I've made this comment before, is that north of 494, Portland Avenue is an award-winning complete streets corridor with kind of industry-leading pedestrian connections. When I look at this slide, I see things like improved pedestrian connection across 494 with a potential new pedestrian bridge, similar comments on the 12th Avenue north-south connection. And I look at that, and then I see comments like increased traffic on Portland Avenue due to access changes. And what I think is it's sort of this implied idea that because of this access consolidation, we're going to have more traffic on Portland Avenue, and pedestrians and bikes can go elsewhere. And I just, while that may be true for bikes to some extent, for pedestrians, if I'm somebody who lives north of Portland and want to walk to the Walmart south of Portland, that doesn't work. I'm not going to walk a half a mile out of the way. So my comment is for Councilmember Troutman and for others who are going to take this to the PAC, that we're not building a standard MnDOT bridge that says we're going to accommodate, double left turn lanes, a whole bunch of vehicle through lanes and nothing else, but that it also includes non-motorized facilities as well. And it's not good enough to say they can go somewhere else. So kind of a soapbox rant, but very important, I think, for Portland Avenue.
I agree with that completely.
Mr. Chair, if I may, as I noted before, I'll get into a little bit more of the specific discussions that we've been having on Portland, but I think you'll find that our staff agrees with you, Commissioner Edgerton, and we've been making that message clear to MnDOT throughout the process. I believe it remains to be seen what the final outcome will be. But we've been very, very strongly advocating that message throughout the past 6 months.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that to be the case 100%. I'm just sort of stating it for the record.
And Joe, what is the projected, even, I know this is in the air, but when do they think they would start on this project, and when do they think would be completed?
So I think I'll answer that to the best of my ability and say that whatever the first project is going to be for this entire corridor vision is yet to be determined. At this point, it's looking like it's probably a combination of the 35W interchange improvements, and hopefully from Richfield's perspective, work on the bridges and the interchange improvements along the east side of the corridor. The reality is none of it is full funding from MnDOT, and so the likelihood of the first project moving forward is probably in the range of 2 to 5 years timeframe.
That would be to start or before it's completed?
To start.
And so I guess with that in mind, and maybe this is addressed later on, but if it starts in 2 to 5 years, we're looking at 2025, right? And with that in mind, the UK and other European countries, have gotten to this point where they're outlawing non-electric cars by 2030 and 2035, right? And by that time, AI is going to become more prevalent, and AI self-driving cars will be everywhere. Is that in any way, that future that's like right on our doorstep, considered in the MnDOT plans at all? Anything with electric cars, anything with AI or self-driving cars?
I can say from my participation in the TAC meetings, I don't believe it's been a subject that's been discussed, at least widely, if at all. Certainly, it's something to be considered, and I think it's a point we can bring up on the staff level, and it could be brought up on the PAC level if our representatives were so inclined.
I'd say that
If I could just add something there, people might scoff at the idea of electric cars being still off in the future, but electric bikes now through COVID, they are exploding, and people are seeing them as a useful commuting tool. People who are not cyclists are buying them and using them. They're more affordable than a car. So that makes it even more important that cycling lanes, not only accommodate, people pedaling, but people on bikes that are powered. And, if people continue to adapt these as they are now, those bike lanes are going to be much needed.
I was just going to add those technology issues are issues that we've raised at the PAC, and so we'd love to see those considerations made at the TAC level too.
Thanks, Councilman Member Troutman. Mr. Chair, do you feel comfortable moving along then here with the presentation?
Yeah, if there's nobody else that has any comments right now, let's move on. And if anyone does, just speak up.
I guess I have one before we move off this slide. It has to do with a potential new noise wall note. I always find them to be a solution that has trade-offs. If we're talking about equity, any noise wall that be placed along this corridor would be on the south side of some of the higher density housing and things that are along there. We may solve a noise problem, but then we'll also, depending on the height and the placement of that wall, deny them sunlight. Losing daylight for gardening and things, and yards along there should be certainly considered. Again, solving one problem and creating another one is very easy with those sort of mitigation efforts.
Commissioner Waltz, I'll just note that one of the points of discussion at our TAC meeting this morning when this was presented to the TAC was that a number of these impacts or benefits do need to be refined further. And I think I mentioned it a few minutes ago that there's some of these that are shown as either impacts or benefits right now for certain user groups that may be exactly the opposite for other user groups. And that's something that the TAC has expressed the MnDOT team could do a better job of defining.
And if I may, just for context, because I deal with this stuff based on professional experience, noise walls in particular, Commissioner Walls, are voted in based on impacted, they call it receptors, but based on impacted units, if you will. So they need a majority approval to go in. So for what that's worth, those directly adjacent to the noise wall get a vote.
Thank you for clarifying that.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to that next slide.
All right. Again, there's just a couple more slides here of the benefit impacts map. I think the last one I knew was going to be our big point of discussion, which I think was appropriate. So this one deals particularly with the Min-Pass westbound lanes on the east side of the project between 35W and Highway 77. I'm going to skim through that if that's okay with everyone. This deals with the Min-Pass eastbound lanes in that same section. So the next point I'd like to touch on, in the MnDOT team's presentation to the PAC, this is actually one of the last slides in their presentation. I felt it was appropriate to move it here right after the discussion with the benefits and impacts map. Because really what the benefits and impacts map is a tool for developing the implementation plan for the corridor vision. Now, the implementation plan is ultimately the plan that takes all of the corridor elements, evaluates the benefits and impacts, looks at different criteria for each of the corridor elements, and ultimately is used to recommend the implementation or the phasing, if you will, of the entire vision over a series of projects. So like I noted, the first project is likely to be some combination of the interchange at 35W and improvements to the bridges on the east side of the corridor. But the implementation plan really needs to look at all of the elements and determine what's a plan or a schedule or phasing or staging, however you'd like to refer to it, to implement the whole vision. So the goal of this is not just to plan one project and then let the rest of it sit there and gather dust. The goal is to let's plan the first project and then move into the additional projects, because there's a lot of benefits of this vision that aren't going to be realized until all of the elements are constructed as one vision. So the criteria that MnDOT has put together, there are 7 criteria here that the implementation plan will use to assess each of the project elements. I'm not going to read through each of them, but we have constructability, community support, equity, asset management, cost and budget, operations and safety, and funding. And there's if the commission is so inclined, I can share the current implementation plan memo. It's a 30-some page document that goes into the detailed analysis of each of these criteria for each of the 9 vision corridor elements. So it's a pretty technical document. It doesn't make any recommendations at this time. It's merely a document they've put together to compile all of the information. But the intent is that that information and these tools that they've developed will be used to develop the final implementation plan.
Unless there's objection, I think it would be worthwhile to at least go through it quickly to understand what their working definitions are for these.
Sure, just go through this slide.
Sure.
Sure. So I'll just kind of read through it here. Constructability is looking at how the corridor elements are either independent or interdependent to each other for construction. Will include considerations of traffic management and throwaway/redo work. So what they intend to do here is they'll take each of the elements and say, for instance, we want to construct element 4, but it can't be constructed until element 7 is constructed. I'm just pulling out numbers here. I'm not sure exactly which is 4 or 7. But the intent is to minimize the amount of work that they have to do in one phase and then end up having to redo or improve upon or fix in a second phase. So minimizing the temporary portions of the vision. Community support considers the support from both corridor advocacy groups and the local government agencies. Will look to TAC and PAC representatives to provide input. This is obviously a process that's ongoing with our TAC and our PAC. A couple other things to note here. There are a number of advocacy groups for both the 35W corridor and the 494 corridor. So reaching out to those advocacy groups from MnDOT team to gain support and consent on these projects. As I noted before, any project that's ultimately developed here will be subject to a public review process, subject to detailed review by you, the Transportation Commission, and subject to municipal consent from city councils. Moving on, equity ensures fair distribution of mobility options and transportation investments. We'll analyze based on review of the benefit impact mapping to determine specific benefits and impacts to underrepresented communities. So really the big tool there is what we just went through with the benefit impact mapping, which I'll reiterate again, I think is a work in progress, and there's improvements to be made there, but that is the tool that the MnDOT team is using to make these assessments.
Who, at the end of the day, who has final say or input on whether or not a fair distribution of mobility options and transportation investments was met or not?
So ultimately, the approval and recommendation to move forward with the vision is given by the PAC, the Policy Advisory Committee. So the process is that MnDOT will be going to the PAC next week for what's more or less a check-in. And I'll show you, they've got their schedule laid out for the next couple of months as one of the last slides here. But we'll come back for some more TAC meetings, meetings with cities, and meetings with the specific bicycle pedestrian work group, which I'll talk about a little bit as well. And then ultimately the TAC makes a recommendation to the PAC, which the PAC considers and either approves or denies for the vision. Does that answer your question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, thank you.
The next evaluation criteria here is asset management. So this considers life cycle management of the assets, including new construction, maintenance, minor preservation, repairs, major rehabilitation, and construction. So I'll just give the example in the draft memo that's been distributed. They've gone through, for example, every section of roadway and every bridge across the corridor, analyzed the current life of the bridge, the current condition, if it needs to be reconstructed, rebuilt, redecked. What is the lifespan of a new bridge or the current bridge, and are trying to take into account the condition of all the assets either existing or proposal on the corridor, and how those can be not manipulated but accounted for in the vision planning, in the implementation of the vision. The next is cost and budget. This criteria is defined as the construction cost for separate elements along the corridor vision, which leads to the development and setting of the budgets for each independent project to build the vision. As of yet, no one outside of the MnDOT team has seen any of the cost estimations for the different corridor elements. We've been informed that that's something that's coming within the next few weeks, and then will be used as a consideration in the implementation plan for the vision. Operation safety, we'll look at the expected operations based on implementation of the different corridor segments. So one of the elements playing in here is, again, looking at, do we take pieces or full parts of each corridor element, and depending on how they're built or how they're phased, are there certain operation or safety concerns or benefits that can be realized by implementing the different sections of the vision in different ways. And then lastly is funding. Based on current dollars available and the future funding programs for the vision. Current funding includes corridors of commerce, MnDOT, Metro District, and local cost participation. One thing I will mention that our staff has made a request to the team and to the TAC is that the funding considerations for the implementation of the vision really need to focus on more than just the first project. That's something that the MnDOT team brought to the PAC, the Project A, which is now dead, really was developed in large part due to them trying to make a project that fit the funding and the money that they had to do a project. And the PAC rejected that pretty strongly. And so the recommendation or the request moving forward is that the funding should not be the sole basis for determining a project or implementing the vision of the project or of the corridor, and that the implementation plan really needs to include a commitment to not just funding the first project with money that's already available, but identifying and seeking out funding to complete the full vision along the corridor.
Thank you for going through that. I guess I have two comments I'd like to make and share with you and the councilman. I think that kind of missing from the evaluation criteria are a couple things. One is analyzing relevance, and so looking at the equity, which is really important, and using the cartoon that you provided. If we're providing extra parts to stand on at a fence that nobody is interested in looking over, technically we're addressing an equity issue, but is it relevant? What are the most relevant equity issues that need to be addressed? I think that needs to be taken into consideration with it. Otherwise, I think we can go down this rabbit trail of saying we're doing things to improve equity, but really are so marginally relevant that it sounds only good on paper, but how is it actually affecting people's lives? The other is effectiveness. Like, what are the effectiveness of the plans that are coming in? And that's where I go back to the Penn Avenue thing. What is the effectiveness of that? Taking away a transportation option instead of just adding to them. And then also one that's not in their plan evaluation criteria is any kind of sustainability consideration that I can see, or at least it's not called out. From an economic perspective and from an environmental perspective, and I think blending that again with effectiveness and relevance, I don't know, those are just some things that I would see maybe could overarch most of this as well, as far as what to evaluate this. If nobody else has any other comments, we can move on to the next slides.
Okay, so I think everything up until this point was kind of a broad corridor vision overview. The next few items that I have here deal with things that are a little more specific, I think, to Richfield and are of interest to hopefully the Transportation Commission, and they certainly are to our staff. And the Portland Avenue interchange is the first one. Has been a very significant portion of the last 6 months of discussion for city staff in both the TAC meetings, the city coordination meetings, and our bicycle pedestrian group meetings. So the kind of quick summary here, I think, is that there was a revisit by the TAC of all the interchange types. And what MnDOT has here in their presentation is saying that the TAC agreed to a tight diamond interchange as the preferred interchange option. I'll put a caveat in there that I think our staff's interpretation was that at that point in September, that seemed like the leading option that should be explored more. But recent discussion has been that as that option has evolved, it's not appearing as of yet to be really an acceptable alternative for our community. And we're pushing to explore other options without, I guess that's a very high level way of saying that there's been a whole lot of discussion on it, and it's still not to a point where I think our staff or probably yourselves as commissioners or our council would be in support of what's being shown currently. Just reiterating that a lot of that discussion has been looking at pedestrian and bicycle needs along Portland, as Commissioner Edgerton mentioned. That's a high use corridor, especially in Richfield to the north of 77th Street. There's some great bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure that city staff has worked hard, and the commission and council have worked hard to implement in our city. And there are concerns with the concepts that MnDOT is showing that that's not adequately accommodated or continued through the interchange area. There's also concerns with the right-of-way impacts that they're showing, be it either partial or full takings of businesses along the Portland Avenue corridor south of 77th Street. And the last thing I'll mention is that just within the last few weeks, there's been an alternative concept that's been brought forward, which I think touches on Commissioner Edgerton's comment on this being a community gateway, the Portland Avenue section, and really focusing on building the land use and the design of that area to promote the pedestrian and bike friendly infrastructure, promote the opportunities for development and thriving business and community structure in that area. So that's something that's been brought to the MnDOT team for consideration and is being worked on. But as of yet, I don't think I could give you any confident indication either way of where that will go in the next few weeks. So I apologize. I know it's kind of broad there, and a little bit vague, and that's not my intent, but I also don't want to get too far into the details on something that we don't know a whole lot about yet, if that's understandable.
Yep, I think that's understandable. One of the things we've seen before that makes me just always makes me just curious is we've seen before it happen where we're told, these aren't the detail times, this is just a rough draft. But then the next time we meet, it's, oh, this is the final draft. No changes can be made, And so I think it's a matter of finding out. And it sounds like what you're saying is that's not the case, right? There will be a time in the new year to still criticize and compel changes and not just have to do an up or down vote.
Yeah, that would be my understanding. I think our staff's recommendation, how we move forward with this, certainly.
Okay.
And I'll also just reiterate that this vision concept is not something that's set in stone when it's finished. Where the final details really get worked out is in the project phase of this, of implementing the vision. And so again, when the public process comes into play, the Transportation Commission then has an official role in making recommendations to the council, and there needs to be a municipal consent. And of course, we would push to have that at a point where there's still opportunity for input and change, and not as you said, just an up or down vote. I'll also add that I think, as you're probably all well aware, Richfield's public engagement process differs a lot from other agencies or entities, including MnDOT, where we engage the public very early on, and try to get as much public input as possible. So it's something that staff certainly pushes for with other agencies in these types of scenarios.
Okay, thank you. Is there more slides?
There are.
Great.
Not on Portland. I'll try to move a little bit faster through these. I think I've gone well over my hour of allotted time, probably, but I hope you're finding it valuable and useful. This next slide, I think I can go through these fairly quickly. This is really an example of another analysis the MnDOT team has used. This is called the SPACE data analysis, which is SPACE stands for Suitability of Pedestrian and Cyclist Environment Score. It's kind of an abstract theory or concept in the way it's presented, but it's spatial data that basically uses census data and demographics to. The end result is to provide a heat map, more or less, that shows areas where pedestrian and cyclist infrastructure and environment is more crucial based on the populations that live in those areas. So I'll show you the heat map here in just a second. You notice it's not really bounded by roads or highways, and it uses these hexagons to try to create standardized sets of data. But basically the way it's defined is it takes all these different, what are essentially demographics, and analyzes if they fall above or below certain percentages or averages, and then it assigns a score to a certain hexagon area on a map, and colors it to basically green, yellow, or red. So we'll get into the heat maps. I'm going to skip over this first one because it's really the west quarter of the project. You'll see here's York and Lindale for context, but these overlap a little bit. So essentially, Richfield is right here. And what this is saying is that almost the entirety of Richfield falls into this category of space data that would say this red color indicates that we have a high need for pedestrian bicycle infrastructure based on our demographics, our populations, how people commute, numbers of schools, distance to schools. Those were some of the demographics that were shown in that slide just a little bit ago. But also the demonstration here in relation to 494 is that there's a lot of overlap of that area between Richfield and Bloomington. And so having a corridor, highway corridor here that cuts off that infrastructure and doesn't provide for connectivity between the two cities for these uses is really, really detrimental to these populations. So one of the ways that this has been investigated with the MnDOT team and the TAC is looking at an origin destination analysis. Streetlight data it's basically scrubbed cell phone location data that analyzes where people are coming from and going to from different areas. And so MnDOT obtained this data and basically did an analysis for the 2nd Avenue pedestrian bridge, looking at coming north to south and south to north, where different populations are moving across the 494 corridor. So the red areas correspond to a higher number of trips originating from that area. Green areas, a lesser number of trips. You can see the total number of trips. This is 2nd Avenue north to south and 2nd Avenue south to north. So really the intent here was to look at that existing pedestrian bridge and say, is it being used? Is it something that the community needs? Is it something that needs to be improved? And some of the discussion we've had in the TAC includes at some point in the future doing public outreach specifically regarding these pedestrian bridges and trying to get public input on how these can either be improved or modified or rebuilt to better serve the community. But I think the key point is that this data show that the pedestrian connectivity in these locations is used and is important and is something that's needed. I don't believe that MnDOT was considering removing this bridge, but there wasn't necessarily a discussion of whether it needed to be improved or not, and now there is that discussion. Probably the more interesting point is the second slide, which looked at the same type of data for the Chicago Avenue corridor, where there is not an existing pedestrian bridge, but the data here shows that really this section is more in need of that pedestrian connection than 2nd Avenue is. If you look at the numbers I had on the last slide, it's about 350 north to south and about 1,000 from south to north. So we're doubling that number of trips in this area as compared to 2nd Avenue. You'll probably guess, as probably many of you have noticed, this red square right here is Walmart. So a big destination from those populations on the north side of 494 who need to get down to Walmart to do their shopping, and a large portion of those populations are not vehicular users or don't have a vehicle in their family. So the outcome of this is that the likely project recommendation when the bridges are the roadway bridges are reconstructed is that there will be a new pedestrian bridge recommended at Chicago Avenue to serve the pedestrian and bicycle users that need to cross between Richfield and Bloomington. So these couple of slides are not something that's being presented to the PAC, but I thought it was important and interesting to show you the commission here. I think this is one of the really positive things that has come out of this process, and I think something our staff is excited about for sure. So if there's no questions there, I will move on to just a couple more things and we'll wrap it up.
Joe, if I can, Dan Edgerton here. I think that I'll second. That's awesome. That's a great finding. I just want to say that if the answer is a potential future pedestrian bridge at Chicago, that needs to be included as part of whatever project package that MnDOT comes up with for funding. So in other words, it can't be something that says this other bridge, go get your own money for it, if that makes sense. And I'm saying that rhetorically. I know that staff is on board with me, but I'm just wanted to sort of throw that out there for the record.
And if I can jump in here just with a quick anecdote and just sharing that these are really important findings. It was, I think, 3 weeks ago. I was at the corner of Portland and 494, folks walking over that bridge at night, and there was a mother alone with her child after dark, and she let go of her stroller just for a second. And if you're familiar with the sidewalk there, it's at an incredibly steep incline, and just like some terrible part of a movie, that stroller went right out into oncoming traffic. And thankfully, the cars screeched to a halt and everybody was okay. But just when we think of the number of people that use it and what we do, just another consideration is just how safe or unsafe the current walking conditions are. Yeah, that one way there, and the pedestrian access right now is just really questionable and dangerous. So it's not data, it's just an anecdote, but I just thought I would share that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if there's no other comments, we can move on to the next slide.
Sounds great. This is one of the last couple of sections, I think, here. Not a whole lot of content here, but just a note that there is a bicycle pedestrian focused group that I believe MnDOT had met with in the a year plus ago was the last time they met, up until maybe 6 weeks ago when it was reconvened. So I'll just, the caveat is, I think most of you are aware, I've been with the city for about a year, so was not part of those initial meetings, but have been over the past 6 weeks or so. A group that's consisted mainly of City of Richfield, City of Bloomington, and Hennepin County staff. Especially those staff involved in such as ADA coordinators or pedestrian bicycle engineers on the county side, or planners. It also involves Three Rivers Park District discussing their trail connections in the region and over 494, specifically at 12th Avenue. So that group has met, I think, 3 or 4 times in the last 6 weeks, probably, specifically looking at the bridge connections over 494 and how the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure will be implemented in those cross sections. I'll say that those are all being worked through currently. There's nothing that has come out of those discussions, I think, that's concrete in one way or the other, but there is progress being made. So the last couple steps here, I think I've got 4 more slides and really just wrap it up. These are the steps outlined by the MnDOT team after they present to the PAC next week. The first will be MnDOT estimating the cost of all the elements. So I mentioned that was something we as a TAC or as city staff have not yet seen, but expect to be coming through. Developing the different options for the implementation plan. So that's putting together, a couple of drafts of the implementation plan that say, here are some options for how we phase project the entire vision. So for instance, here's a first project, a second project, third project, fourth project, the ultimate goal being building this entire corridor. After MnDOT develops those options, they'll be vetted within MnDOT staff internally and then brought to the TAC for consideration. The TAC then would choose a recommendation implementation plan option or reject the options if that is where this ends up. Once an option is chosen, then the TAC would basically make a recommendation to the policy advisory committee, who would have the final decision on whether that final vision plan and final implementation plan for the vision is acceptable and whether MnDOT can move forward with that plan. And then the next step would be proceeding with securing final funding and delivering whatever the first project is in the implementation plan. One note that I made to MnDOT staff during our TAC this morning, I think is really important. I'd like to make here, and I've said it already tonight, but this last bullet point really needs to be not only funding whatever the first project is, but making a commitment to fund the entire vision. So even if MnDOT doesn't have money available to build the vision at this time, there needs to be a commitment to seeking out and securing funding from multiple sources in creative ways if need be to fund the entire vision, because unless the entire vision is implemented, there's a lot of elements and benefits that aren't going to be realized by just doing one or two projects piecemeal. Lastly is quick look ahead schedule, which I mentioned we'd have here. These are just some hard, I say hard dates, and anything could change based on recommendations from the TAC and the PAC. But you can see basically we had a meeting this morning with the TAC that was previewing this presentation. The PAC meeting is next week, which is a recap. There's no action from the PAC on the implementation plan at that point. And then we've got a couple more TAC meetings in January to work on finalizing the implementation plan. And then going back to the PAC at the end of February to seek that concurrence on the final plan. Obviously, all this is subject to change depending on what happens in the next couple months here. It could all be changed next week depending on what the instructions or requests from the PAC are. But this is MnDOT's plan as it stands currently for the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Joe? Comments?
Thank you for a really thorough presentation.
I'll second that. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I really appreciate it. I hope it's been helpful and useful for you in catching up a little bit on something I don't think you've heard about for a number of months, but something we've been working hard on, and we're remaining hopeful that we're going to get to a vision and implementation of that vision for the corridor that's going to benefit our community.
Great. I'm going to look forward to hearing how the meeting went, hopefully at our January meeting. Okay. Well, this concludes the part of our agenda then on the I-494 Airport to Highway 169 implement planning process. We'll move on to the next part in our agenda, which is the updates. Nicollet Mill and overlay. I think that may have been prematurely added to the agenda. I'm not sure, but Joe, did you want to talk to that, or was that Olivia?
I'll just address that one real quick, and then Olivia can give the project updates. I think that was maybe just a carryover from a previous agenda when Jack Rose put this agenda together. But the short answer there is that the median installations on Nicollet Avenue that the county was doing earlier this year are now complete and open. So I'll pass off to civil engineer Olivia Wickland.
Real quick, did we had that unseasonably cold weather and snow when they were finishing those? Did that have any impact on their structure or anything like that?
Not to my knowledge. I'll admit that I'm not the person that's out there looking at them every day, but I wasn't aware of any issues that they encountered due to the weather.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Update. I'll try and keep it short and sweet. So first, so this last meeting, what was it? The state passed a bonding bill which includes this project. So this ended up closing the budget gap for the project, and essentially that 77th Street underpass construction is going to occur in 2020. With projects and
I'm sorry, excuse me. Is anybody else having a hard time hearing? You're breaking up a little bit.
Yes, I'm also
might be
catching.
my Wi-Fi.
Olivia, maybe
Yeah,
would
copy.
suggest. We love to see you when you talk, but maybe turn off your video. That might give you a little bit more bandwidth. We
I
didn't
can
get
do
into
that.
that.
Can you guys hear me a little better now?
Better so far.
Part that you guys did hear.
It sounded like the 77th Street underpass will be started in 2022. Did I catch that?
So kind of I said was that big bonding bill the project is a part of for this project. As construction goes, that's going to be all 2021, all of 2020, and then maybe a little bit of 2023. So then I'll go to the next. That would be construction. And so city staffs during project design project and construction is scheduled for 20. As far as for those that are familiar, I'm still working on building the stations at Knox Avenue underpass on the Richfield side of State Avenue south of or summer of 2021. Then the line project that bonding bill I mentioned before, and Metro construction. This they'll be getting a presentation next week's council work. It should be available on the city's website if I would like to view it.
Could I ask one quick question about the Nicollet medians? I'm just wondering about the east side on 72nd Street where they like cut and then stopped. Are they going to finish those curb ramps, or do you know what's going on there?
I'm gonna bounce one back to him. Item from.
Okay.
Sure. Liaison O'Leary, that you said 72nd Street on the east side?
Yes.
Okay, that's not something I'm aware of in particular, but I will add it to our to-do list for staff to go get it checked out here in the next few days, and we'll follow up with the county. And I can touch base with you independently to let you know if that works.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
All right. If we're completed with that, we'll go on to our next agenda item, which is other commissions and bike advocates. Sean, why don't we start with you, Planning Commission, and then bike advocates.
Yeah, Planning Commission hasn't really had any major business. I guess the only thing maybe to mention is the work session we had with the City Council regarding Veterans Park area and planning study that will be taking place around there. The Legion is planning on selling their property, and so the city's trying to figure out options for it, and if private development occurs, what they want that to look like. So there is a moratorium that was at least partially passed or had the first reading at the last council meeting, and would prevent anything from being built there for 9 months. So that's moving forward. The other thing is, I guess, to be determined on my involvement with this commission going forward. As you might know, I was elected to City Council in November. So at the very least, I will certainly not be representing the Planning Commission anymore, and you will get a new liaison from them. And we will see if I can maybe find somebody else to take up the bike ped role here. But yeah.
What are you able to say what happened to the Legion, or why they are closed and why they're selling?
I understand they had financial difficulties. I don't know a lot of details. I think a lot of organizations like that have struggled with membership and maintaining income over time, but I don't know extensive details.
And the moratorium just says nobody can rush in there and break ground for at least 9 months. Is that right?
Yeah, basically if it is finalized at the next council meeting, any planning application would be held and could not be acted on or considered at that time. Whereas if that weren't the case, we would be obligated to consider it immediately under the current designation, which is high density residential.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may, I just wanted to say thank you, Sean, for your work as liaison in this group. We hope to keep you up, but congrats on your election. And if we lose you, we understand.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I've been here 7 years or something as a bike ped liaison and changing roles. So it's been a great time.
All right. Other commissions. The only other commission I believe that's represented here would be City Council, which is the only commission. Councilman Troutman, is there anything from Council you'd like to tell us about?
Council member-elect O'Leary kind of shared the bigger news from the last council session, and we're looking forward to the interview process for new commissioners. So for those of you either that are engaged now and staying on, or those of you that are rolling off, if you know somebody that'd be a good fit, I believe now as of the first of the month, applications are up. So it's always a fun process to interview and connect with everybody, even though it's really short.
Great. Thank you very much. Unless I've missed any other commissioners who I don't see here, we'll move on to. Oh, sorry.
I'll report for community services. There's a number of things surprisingly that are still going on. Most of the recreation programs, obviously that were held outdoors, are moving indoors, and they're working closely with public health to try and determine safety plans for all the programs there. There's an active youth grant from Hennepin County for $100,000 that's being spent on supplies, cleaning supplies, free programming, facility admission, a variety of different things throughout the city. All the farmers markets have moved indoors starting early November. There's the new dog park that had a ribbon cutting down at Roosevelt Park. There's a large dog park and a small dog area down in the south end of Richfield now. That's one of the bigger deals. Continual, as always, playground replacement. Washington, Madison, and the South Playground at Taft were all replaced in the last several months. The Universal Playground, that planning is also still ongoing, hopefully finishing construction at Augsburg Park this coming summer. But we'll see how that ends up going. Two major changes to capital improvement. The big ones are going to be Veterans Park parking lot is becoming a safety hazard. So that's probably very likely going to be repaved this coming summer. And the pool, since it was not filled with water, cracked due to the heat over the summer, since no one was there. So that's also a big fix that has to be done over the next several months before we can hopefully have an open pool this coming summer. And we don't meet in December, so we'll talk again in January.
How bad is the pool crack? Is that what is that like?
It's about one playground's worth, so about $75K to fix. It seems like.
Ouch.
Yep.
Yeah, would not have anticipated that. Okay. Thank you for the update. Is there any questions for Community Service Commission? Okay, thank you very much for your update. Anyone else before I move on? All right, thank you all very much. Moving on now to our work plan review and next steps. There's two items on here, the Penn Avenue study and the I-494 airport to Highway 169. Joe, is that something you can speak to, those next steps?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm going to throw to Commissioner Edgerton here in just a second. I'm getting an echo from somebody. I'll just give just a little basic one sentence on the Penn Avenue study, and then I'll throw to Commissioner Edgerton. But basically, the findings and reports from that study are in a draft stage at this time. There's no more open houses planned for the study. And I think Commissioner Edgerton, in his role as a consultant on that project, can give a little bit more in-depth update if you'd like to share with the commission.
Yeah, thank you, Joey. You hit the high points, but just to fill the group in, a couple of things have happened on that study since we've last updated you. The good news is this. The good news is that one of the original driving factors behind this study was this idea that the county sort of had a little bit of uncertainty about doing anything on Penn because they were afraid that they would have to go in and basically buy a row of businesses north of 66th Street. And as a result of this study and the work that's been completed, the county has sort of accepted that that's not the case. And so a key finding of this study is that we can do some solutions, both in the interim with restriping and with a complete reconstruction that mean we don't have to buy a row of businesses. So that's great news. So that's the good news. The be diplomatic, the less positive news is that well, let me just say that, as Joe mentioned earlier, as part of the MnDOT discussion, Richfield does things a little bit differently with our public engagement process and with the way that we kind of vet projects through. And the short version is, while the original scope for this study, which is funded by Hennepin County and the city of Richfield in partnership, called for the development of what I would call a detailed sort of final vision plan for the corridor. The county has recently sort of expressed a hesitation to come forward with an official final plan, if you will. So instead, we've got some sort of recommendations and guidelines that we're working on documenting in the final report. But what this means is that we're not able to get to that open house 3 stage, which is what this commission would usually do in our street design process. where we sort of vet design alternatives. Could anybody hear me? I could, it sounds like I was cutting out. Sorry. Certain platforms don't like my computer, and I usually use a headphone, but I didn't. I'll just stop. I think I hit the high points. If there are questions, type them in the chat.
Not seeing anything now, but if anything comes up, we'll gladly have you answer them. Thank you. And then airport to highway 169, did we already kind of talk about what those next steps are, Joe? Or are there other ones?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think we pretty much covered that in the presentation. At this point, the next steps, as I noted, are the MnDOT team going through the TAC and PAC process. And I think I'll consult with transportation engineer Rose here in the next couple of weeks as to when we think would be the appropriate time to come back to the commission with another update.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Any other work plan review or next steps items? Otherwise, I'll move on. All right, not seeing any. Our next upcoming event is next year, 2021. January 6th is our next scheduled meeting, and I'm just going to check the calendar, make sure that's not. Yeah, I don't see any reason that would need to be moved, so we'll just keep that as is unless anyone feels differently. But otherwise, I think January 6th should work. And unless there's anything else, we're up to adjournment. So anything anyone wants to add or say before we adjourn for the evening? All right, well, not seeing any. Thank you all very much for this year. Hopefully next year we don't have to always meet virtually. And congratulations to Sean. And thank you for all of your service on the Transportation Commission. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night.